This is an exciting moment, and that's because this is the very first video for our brand new YouTube channel. You'll quickly see why this is one of my very own favorite personal games that I've played over the entire last 30 years. We'll get right into this game in just about 1 minute, and this brief introduction is designed so you can see exactly where we're coming from and what you can expect to learn and take away from each and every one of our instructional videos. First and foremost, you'll receive powerful strategies packed into this contest and every single teaching we ever bring to you. Our unique teaching style is absolutely designed to bring you the maximum possible in the minimum amount of time. And because of that, you'll be able to easily adapt much of what you learn to your own style very quickly. These powerful strategies, they're absolutely timeless, and you'll be able to apply them in a countless number of ways as time goes by. So that means your input will help shape the material we bring to you each week. So just let us know exactly which areas you want to concentrate on and how you want to grow and improve. That way, we'll always stay focused on what's most important to you, and we'll put that valuable information into many different videos as time goes by. So, getting into the game as a brief introduction, this guy was rated over 2300, which is a very extremely high rating. He's won a lot of tournaments, he's won a lot of prize money, he's a very difficult opponent, he hardly ever loses. However, what I'm proud of is not the fact that I won the game, but it's how I won the game, because this game got a lot of attention. It was published on 3 different websites. It was published in the Southern California Chess Newsletter. And I got about 60 emails from all different players who asked me questions and made comments upon the game. So it's a game I'm very proud of. Without further ado, let's get right into the moves. Okay, I'm black. E4, C5, knight F3, E6, C3. Now, more commonly played is knight F3. I take that back. More commonly played there is D4. What C3 is about is he wants to be able to play D4 and then recapture with this pawn right here. Then he'll have 2 pawns side by side in the center after I take him, which is pretty much compulsory when he advances. So that's what that's about. I play knight F6. Now I put some arrows in here just to illustrate the concepts, and so you can see the geometry of what's happening and what the player has to visualize when they're playing the game at the time they're playing it, because they can't see these pieces moving around. They have to see the geometry in their own mind as they look upon the board. So anyway, I play knight F6 because his pawn is already on C3. The way he really wants to defend that pawn is with knight C3. He wants to bring his knight to the square the pawn occupies. He can't do that. So he basically has 2 choices. His first choice is to play here, and that would be a very passive move, and I'd be very happy if he played that move. Well, it's not a terrible move. Grandmasters have played that move before, but basically when white plays like this, it's like saying to me that, hey, I don't have to worry about the guy making a lot of really aggressive threats early on. We're both going to kind of develop quietly and see what evolves in the early part of the game. So he advances, and that's why I played the knight there, is to compel him to advance. That might seem like a bad thing. However, my knight now occupies a very nice square in the center of the board. Also, his pawn has advanced, and I'll be able to oppose his pawn with my pawn, capture his pawn with my pawn, and that will neutralize a large portion of his space advantage, and that's always a good thing. So, continuing on, he attacks my bishop, my knight with his bishop. I play here, and what the arrows are showing you here is the fact that I'm opening up a good diagonal for my bishop because I can develop it to this square right here, and from that square it obviously has a very nice diagonal and it influences a large number of squares. Okay. On the other hand, if he takes me, let's look at how that transpires. He takes me, I capture back, he castles, and now in that scenario I put my bishop there, and that's also is a beautiful diagonal. So the main point is that if he captures on d5, I get a beautiful diagonal right here. Whoop. And if he doesn't capture on d5, well, that's how it went, so let's look at that. So he casts, he plays there. All right, I play here and I defend the knight. So this is a good diagonal. So he had one move to make the decision about whether he wanted to capture or not. He decided not to, and that overall was a good choice. Most players wouldn't capture there. But on the other hand, if he's not going to capture there, why play his bishop there in the first place? So continuing on, it's castle, bishop e7. We both develop. Puts his queen there, which is almost always where it goes in this scenario. I castle, he plays here. Now, some brief commentary on that particular move. That's a very passive move, and I'm not even sure exactly why he played that. The main thing to point out about that move is that early on in the game, when I see a player play a move like that, I'm black. And black's normal strategy is to neutralize white's advantage of the first move. However, if I see my opponent play a sort of a passive move that doesn't really appear to further his dynamic prospects, then what I look to do then is not just to neutralize my opponent's advantage, I look to take over the advantage, because my idea is that if he's going to play sort of passively, then I'm going to play very actively, and by playing actively there's a very good chance that I'll be able to take over the advantage, the initiative. I'll be able to become proactive and force my opponent to become reactive. So let's see how the game went. F6. Okay, now there's a lot going on with that move, and I put a lot of time into that move. Much more common is to play this pawn forward to that square, okay? And F6, however, is a much more aggressive idea, and the point of F6 is actually several points. The first point is that in most variations, I'm going to capture here. Let's see what happens when I capture here, okay? It's going to open up this line for my rook, so that's a very nice line. Not only that, when I capture here, we'll see that my castle here converges upon that square, and my knight also converges upon that square. So what we have there is what's called a focal point. A focal point is a point where two squares, two pieces converge on the same square, and a lot of times when they do that, that point becomes a square that you occupy with your pieces, and it can be very, very powerful when that happens. So let's go ahead. He plays back there now, and clearly he has not played very efficiently, and because he could have moved his bishop there in just one move and not two. So okay, and now that's reminding me why he played a3, because he had already decided that he wanted to bring his bishop to that square, and when he played there, he didn't want me to be able to attack it with this, okay, because here's what happens. I take here, he recaptures, and now if his pawn was not on a3, I'd be able to attack his bishop with my knight, and he didn't want that. However, the thing is, his play has not been efficient so far. Mine has. So what do you think my next move is going to be? Okay, ask that question because it's always good to improve your pieces and the active prospects of your pieces. a lot of times what a very powerful move is to move your queen even just a single square, because when you move it to a single square, what that means is you change the color of the squares your queen controls, and that's huge. You can see in this case I'm targeting a very nice square, and my queen from this square converges with my bishop on that square. Not only that, I have something very special in mind at this point, which we'll do in a second. He captures here. Now, this is something I had in mind when I played Queen E8, and this is not something I would normally think of over the board, so I think the lights were all on this evening. Okay, it's like a traffic light, and the light was green. So the point up here now, and the thing about that move is it involves a very deeply planned exchange sacrifice. I calculated almost 20 minutes on this move. And the key idea is that when white's star square bishop captures the rook on f8, okay, here's something good to remember. Every move creates a weakness. So when I play here, what that means is this square here is no longer defended, because prior to recapturing that pawn on that square, it was defended. So now it's not defended, and his bishop is clearly going to occupy that square. I mean, it's longing to be occupied by that bishop. So the thing is, when his bishop occupies that square, then let's go ahead and put it there. When his bishop occupies that square, it's attacking my rook. Now, let's look at this. I play here. That's a new variation because it's not what I played. First of all, I would never play this way because my rook is now blocking the line that my queen wants, and I'd be in a very congested situation. So what I played instead was here. The thing about that move is that I'm sacrificing this rook here for that bishop, and rooks are worth 5 when we think in terms of point count chess, and bishops are worth 3. Unless you have compensating factors to make up for that point difference, you're going to lose the game well over 90% of the time. So it goes without saying that he captured my rook. However, I do have compensating factors, so let's look at what they are. The first thing, and the key point in what we already discussed, is that the knight is very powerfully placed on that square. Not only is the knight powerfully placed on that square, it occupies that square with a double attack. And the two squares under consideration are, of course, his queen on e2 and his pawn on g2. Now, right now, the pawn on g2 is not, like, threatened immediately with the capture. However, the queen is threatened with the capture. But not only that, look at all the force we've got bearing down upon that square. And look who's going to come forward, step up a single square, and look at what's going to be happening at that point in time. So he's got two choices. He can move his queen away, but if he moves his queen away, now my queen moves forward, and look what's happening on g2. He could move his knight back, but if he moves his knight back, see, that square is totally conquered. That square is so totally conquered that he actually has to take my knight with his queen. I recapture. Now I've won his queen. He takes back here with his knight, and we'll briefly look at this scenario. I would take here. He can take my bishop. That's a good thing for him. I would take down there. He'd come here. I'd take there. He'd go there, and I'd come back. So this is a very complicated situation, and it's kind of difficult to assess. However, the bottom line is black has a queen and 3 pawns for a rook and 2 pieces. Using, again, the point count system, that gives black a 1-point advantage. When you get into assessing a position like this, you've got to look at more than points. So let's go a bit further. Both king sides are shattered. White has a development advantage, and black has greater central control. Let's look at the central control for a second. See all these pawns here? All these pawns control a whole lot of squares. And when they advance, they potentially control more squares. Those pawns are very, very valuable. And one of the biggest keys about those pawns is white has all these extra pieces for my queen. However, what those pawns can do is they can control the squares that white's pieces want to move to. So although white has a lot of extra pieces, his pieces are very restricted in terms of their activity, both their immediate activity and their potential long-term activity, because of all the squares that my central pawns will be able to control as the game evolves. So let's go back to the way the game went. He saw all these things. Remember what we said, he's a very strong player. And so he decided not to go into that scenario. What he decided to do was to pick up another bishop. So now he's already captured a rook and a bishop. I've captured nothing in return, so temporarily he has an 8-point advantage. However, and this is the key to the entire combination, and it was this queen move at the very end of the entire sequence is what I saw when I spent 20 minutes calculating this entire variation. So now we have a double attack against G2 where we're threatening checkmate, and we're also threatening to take his queen with check. So that's huge, and there's really, well, he can't move his queen, because if he moves his queen he gets mated. So what he does instead, this was a clever move, and I freely admit that I didn't see that move when I went into this situation. Now what would happen if I took the bishop is something that we don't want to have happen, because what he would do is he would check my king, which would be on this square. Now he checks my king, and then he takes my queen. So he would win my queen instead of me winning his, and of course that's not what we want. So what I do is, just like every good quarterback, I step up into the pocket, and now he plays another tricky move, which is he takes this pawn. And the thing is that if I take this bishop now, what that would allow him to do is get his queen out of dodge by checking my king here, because my king would now be on that square. And what that would mean is the fact that he would get his queen out of dodge. Then he could defend against the mate threat, and he'd just be winning the game. So what that means is that I can't take his bishop when he takes me there. So I have to drop back into the shadows. And the good news is now all of those checks are gone, and he has captured 10 points worth of material on consecutive moves, which I believe is probably a world record, only because I've played over several thousand chess games over the years, and I've never seen anyone ever capture 10 points worth of material and end up with it being their move. I've never seen it happen. Now maybe it has, but on the other hand, maybe this really is a world record. So what he does now is he plays there, and the reason he did that is because he had to defend against checkmate on that square. So now his knight defends that square. So so I take his queen with check. He moves back. And by the way, I'm winning this game now after this. I'm not winning because I have won his queen, because in reality we are about equal in material. But the reason I'm winning is because his king is very extremely vulnerable. I have this knight around it, okay? I have my queen attacking this point, and I have my bishop, I did that earlier, I have my bishop attacking that square right there. So we got a lot of force attacking. Now, it's not enough force yet. So the next thing to do is get more force involved. How do we do that? Watch this move. This is the kind of move that you'll play as you get better and better. See, what that does is I bring my king up to attack his bishop, but why did I really play that move? The reason I really played that move is because I envision this rook right here swinging across to one of these squares on the king side, and specifically the one that I highlighted, because his bishop has to defend that knight right there. Okay, because if he moves the bishop somewhere else, I would just take that knight. So the king move takes advantage of the location of my queen. It takes advantage of his bishop, which we could say is temporarily overextended as a result of the tactical flurry that just transpired. So what he does is first he attacks my queen. That's what's called an in-between move, and an in-between move is where you don't respond immediately to the threat. You make another threat that's stronger threat that was made against you. So he plays that in-between move, which I have to respond to, and I put my queen there. So he just forced me off of this tender square, and he also blocked that diagonal. So that's a good move. Okay. Now he has to bring his bishop to a very awkward square. I mean, it's not attacking anything there. Not only is it not attacking anything, it's going to be subject to attack itself. However, again, he had to put his bishop on that square because my queen is threatening to capture his knight. So he puts his bishop there. I bring my knight out attacking his bishop, and now he plays another in-between move, and this is what he planned when he brought his bishop there, is he plays there. So what's he done? What he's done is he has defended his knight now, which will enable him to get his bishop out of there, and he's also defended his knight simultaneously attacking my queen. And that's always a good thing when you can both attack and defend at the same time. So, however, okay, now I take that pawn there, and now I make new threats. See how nicely my queen is just sort of marauding his entire position. And now I'm threatening to take there. When I take there, I'll be threatening his castle in the corner, and that's no fun for him. So in the meantime, his bishop is attacked down here. He's got to deal with that. So first he checks my king, and so I play there, and now he brings his bishop out. The thing is, I bring my knight in, and what I'm doing with that is I'm threatening a piece. So we're threatening to take there, and he has to deal with that. Not only that, I also opened up my bishop here to attack that pawn, and you can also see that my knight is attacking that pawn. So that particular knight move achieved a lot, and he now has to move his bishop, I believe. Let's see what he did. Yeah, he moved it there. So he got the bishop out of the way, and he defended his weakness there. So that was the best move on the board at that moment in time. He defended that threat. However, now I bring the rook across, and remember we talked about that. We talked about the fact that when I brought my king up and moved it up one square off the back rank, the main reason I did that was so I could bring my rook over, and now you can see every single one of my pieces is very active and extremely involved in the attack. Not only that, my king even got involved in the attack, because when it moved forward, it did so with an attack against one of his pieces. So that is a hallmark of winning chess, is when you play moves that serve more than one purpose. And as we've noted, I've played a whole bunch of moves in this particular game that served a lot of different purposes. And, you know, I'm not trying to brag, but that is one of the reasons that I won this game. So now again, his bishop's under attack. So he, on the other hand, you know, if he let me take here, then he would have moved his knight, and then I would have something bad was happening. My brain's getting a little bit fried here, so I'm going to let that go. But let's just put it this way: it wasn't pretty. Oh, I see what's going on. See, what he's doing here is he is attacking my knight. So if I take his bishop, he takes my knight. attacking my queen. And I did take his bishop, and he got a knight in return, and he also completed his development at the same time. So that actually was a skillful maneuver on his part. So I take there now, and the let's see here. I got to remember what was going on here. Oh yeah, again, I have another double attack. I am threatening his bishop here and his knight here, and so he can't defend both. So what he did was he said, okay, I will attack your knight, because if you take my knight, then let me show you what would have happened if I took his knight. If I took his knight, what he could have done was brought his rook over here, attacking my queen on that square, and then he could have taken my knight here, because he would have had his rook here and his bishop there attacking my knight. So he would have had his own double attack. So that's why he played the way he played. So back to reality. I took his knight now, and the reason I took his knight, see, is because his knight is defending a key weakness here. It's defending that pawn right there. And as you know, I've been focused on this pawn for a while now, and I have two pieces converging on that pawn right there. You know, as I draw these arrows on the board, you can see the kind of geometry that a chess player has to keep in his mind, because he's looking at a board where the pieces aren't moving, but he's picturing all these different movements in his mind. And it's it's sort of a study in physics. That's what it really is, because every piece on the board, it represents a vector. Now that's sort of a teaching I didn't really mean to get into. It just came out. So let's get back to the game. So I take here. He takes my knight with check. I take here. He takes my pawn. I take his knight, and again, we're focused on another weakness. So I've had so many double attacks in this game, just almost continuously for like 10 to 15 moves. I've been attacking multiple pieces and multiple squares continuously, all at the same time, and he just hasn't been able to defend against all the threats. And the moral of the story is that although there were two things happening here in this game. The first thing is that I won his queen, and however, he did have sufficient material for my queen. He had, I had a queen and two pawns for a rook and two pieces. So actually that balanced itself out perfectly. The problem was that my queen was so active and my pieces were so well placed. They were all working together so beautifully, and his pieces were sort of scattered all over the board, and they became subject to attack. Not only that, his king has also been vulnerable the entire time, and as you can see here as we're coming down to the end, that his king is still vulnerable, and we're conquering this weak square that we're looking at in front of us. And so that's basically a tough situation for him. He goes here, he goes there, I check. He goes here, I check there. And the problem now is that no matter where he goes, let's look at what his squares would be. He could go either here, he could go here, or he could go there. See how he's got three dark squares? That's because my bishop, I have a light square bishop. So there's a teaching that I'll do later. It's on what's called color complex. And what you do is you seek to dominate the squares where you have an extra piece on a certain color, and especially that factors into the equation when you have one of the bishops and not both, because what that means is that I have one more piece controlling all the light squares than I have controlling the dark squares. So it's absolutely not coincidence in this situation that we're looking at in front of us that he has 3 dark squares to move to. The sad thing for him is no matter where he moves, okay, if he moves here or here, then I would check here and I would win this castle. If he moves here, then I will check here and then I would still win that castle. So he played, no, if it was me, I would have just resigned at this point, but he played there, I checked here, and then he saw, and I'm sure he saw it last move, he was just sort of stubbornly not willing to resign quite yet. And so I checked there, and then he did. His position was completely hopeless. And that's the game. And there was so much chaos and confusion in that game that the guy who put it in the Southern California Chess newsletter, the way he described it, the heading that he assigned to this game is he put who's on first and what's on second. So it's like a very clever title for that game, and truly one of the most chaotic and confusing games I've ever played. And I probably should have started you guys out with something a little bit simpler. However, I think that this was very well worth showing you guys. And I'm going to stop the recording now briefly, and we're going to get into a summary of what transpired. Okay, I'm back. I hope you enjoyed that contest, and there's 2 key lessons to learn in that contest. One has to do with the power of the pieces, and the other has to do with our state of mind at the board. Let's talk about the pieces first. And like we talked about during the game, specifically, and the key concept I want you guys to take away from this particular teaching is the power of the double attack. What happens frequently is that your opponent can defend against one threat, but when you make multiple threats at the same time, it's often too much to handle. Not only that, it's worth observing that all of this emanated out of the exchange sacrifice, because when white captured the rook on f8, the f4 square became available for occupation by the knight. When the knight landed on f4, it did so with a very powerful impact, and it immediately became the most powerful piece on the board because, as you recall, it attacked the queen on e2, and it also set up a mate threat against the king on g2. In addition to that, the power of the knight combined perfectly with the placement of the queen and the light square bishop, as you saw throughout the game, and all the rest of the things that occurred throughout the game, and all the different multiple double attacks that occurred as time went by. The moral of the story is, when pieces work together, it creates powerful synergy, and many things become possible. Now, the next point is, on the chessboard, the squares where lines intersect. They're called focal points. And focal points embedded deep in your opponent's territory frequently form the foundation of a winning attack. So, what focal points were we looking at during that game? First of all, we were looking at the f4 square, and like we talked about, when the knight landed on that square, it was absolutely devastating. Not only that, we then started concentrating on the e2 square, the g2 square, and the g2 square became a point where multiple pieces converged, and that, of course, came about as a result of the knight occupying f4. So, as the game evolved, we got one more focal point, and that was the f3 square, and the f3 square came about because of the fact that he tried to block that diagonal. Remember how I was attacking on g2? And so he tried to block that diagonal with f3. However, eventually we broke that square down as well. So the second key point is this. It's especially true if you create a preponderance of force against a focal point where you have more pieces attacking than your opponent has defending. And in these cases, you'll be winning the contest a huge percentage of the time. So, now let's talk about our state of mind at the board, and specifically in this case we're talking about inspiration and imagination. Inspiration and imagination are 2 very powerful forces. Not only that, they're inextricably linked together, and we can never be quite sure when they're going to show up. Now, I'll freely acknowledge that the deep conception involved in the exchange sacrifice in the game we just looked at was well beyond my normal capacity to imagine. That means I could have reached that position 10 different times, and it's highly probable that I only would have engineered that combination 1 out of 10 times and probably less. So the question becomes, why did the creative muse show up on my doorstep on that particular occasion? And here's the answer. First of all, let me back up. The first thing is that I can't ever guarantee that the creative muse is going to show up. However, I did spend about 20 minutes putting that combination together, and initially it was born out of the fact I didn't want to give his knight control of the e5 square, so I wanted to put that pawn on f6 so his knight couldn't occupy e5 because the pawn would then be controlling e5. So most of the time I would have quickly given up on the idea and accepted the positional concession of that e5 square. However, on this particular evening my imagination was working at a very high level, and in addition to that I poured a great deal of concentration into the position, which enabled me to get down to the very essence of things, and this led to a true appraisal of the dynamic factors working in my favor. So in summary, you can think of it this way. It's kind of like I'm a solid basketball player who normally scores somewhere around 15 points a game. I'm strong, I'm good, but I'm not a superstar. However, it's well known that every now and then a 15-point player can have a 35-point game. The question becomes, what makes that possible? And the answer is all of what we've talked about: determination, concentration, and a will to win, all combined with your understanding of the game brought to the table at the right moment in time. The bottom line is, I'm absolutely 100% convinced that a grandmaster lives inside each and every one of us. As long as we keep honing our skills and pushing the envelope, eventually our inner grandmaster will show up. Now, it's not going to show up every night, but he will eventually show up, and that's the point. It might be a few years from now, but I promise you he's in there, and true dedication will surface your inner genius. That's a universal law we can count upon. And of course it goes without saying that all of what we're talking about here, it all applies to every area of our lives. Chess is just a mirror of what lies within, and what lies within is always reflected in our world one way or the other. So let's make a commitment right now to becoming our very best selves. And who knows when our very best self will show up. The deeper and more consistent the commitment, the stronger we become. Day by day, more and more, better and better. So that's it for now. If you like this video, then maybe you can help out by liking us on our social media sites. We look forward to bringing you many more videos in the months and years to come. And as always, you can sign up for our newsletter, download our ebooks, and watch our videos. All of that's free. You can also email us at support@professionalchesstraining.com if you'd like a copy of this webinar. Finally, you're welcome to visit our blog and share your chess adventures and aspirations with us at any time. Without question, we look forward to getting to know you better more and more as the months and years go by.